Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we have a look at the 1993 film The Bride with White Hair. This is episode 387. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castle Bridge Media, home of the Castle of Horror anthology. With me from Austin is Tony Savaggio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, which you can find at Global Comics. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the PEN America Fellowship. Say hello, Drew.
Howdy.
Howdy. And finally, also in Denver, we were just at a book club. That is how we roll on a Sunday. Color commentary from Julia Guzman, the book club queen of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
I can't believe you didn't say what the book was. We were talking about the Stepford Wives.
Yes.
The original book.
It was really cool talking about a 50-year-old book that feels like it could have been written in 2022, honestly. It was pretty great.
My dog just came in from outside and smells like marijuana. Shelly, have you been smoking marijuana?
That's what it is to have a house in the burbs in Denver, Colorado.
She's like, it's legal, man. It's Colorado. You can't tell dogs what to do.
The dog is smoking that legal J. Yes. All right.
Right.
The Bride with White Hair is a 1993 Hong Kong wuxia film. I'm probably going to ask Tony what wuxia is in his opening thoughts, whatever other opening thoughts he has. This is directed by Ronny Yu, who is, as we were talking about, is horror royalty on his own, starring Brigitte, Lin, and Leslie Cheung. The film's main character, Lian Nichang, is loosely based on the protagonist of the novel. That became the 1982 film Wolf Devil Woman. So basically, Ronny Yu saw this as a Romeo and Juliet story. That is, we'll get into it. It basically involves a woman who is the greatest warrior of a sort of devil cult, and a man who is the greatest warrior of the defenders of the kingdom, and they are falling in love as the kingdom goes to war against the cult. Apparently, that's not how Wolf Devil Woman goes. So if we get a chance, we'll talk about that. And we've already decided next week we're going to come back for The Bride with White Hair 2, because even though this is a film, this is like an Infinity War Endgame situation that is one giant story, and it's worth getting back to. So opening thoughts. Tony, I'm going to start with you because I know that you and I watched this movie like a long time ago, and I know that it should be one that's a favorite of yours. We'll go Tony, Julia, Drew, and then I'll take us into the conversation. Tony, opening thoughts, and what is wuxia, The Bride with White Hair?
So wuxia, I mean, it's a genre, but it means martial heroes. But in general, there's usually sword play, swords, men and women doing awesome feats of, all kinds of sword play with martial arts. Lots of, there tends to be, as we move to the 90s, especially, a lot of wire work in a lot of wuxia films, but that's not exactly, doesn't have to have that. But yeah, I mean, you can usually expect a lot of cool fights, a lot of great swordsmanship, and possibly, all kinds of like contact palm style hits. It tends to be a lot of fantasy work because all the stuff, you'll have, in addition to cool sword fights, you'll have, hey, I'm going to turn this cloth into a spear, or hair that attacks people, or with Deadful Melody, there's an instrument that can shoot basically martial arts lasers and blow people up. But it's a genre I love. And especially this, like, it's just such a beautiful film. In general, it's one of my favorite stories, and I do agree. I kind of wish we'd watch both, because this part leads into the second part. Like, in some ways, it's a setup film. And I could also watch. I mean, Leslie Chung's also in it, like, I don't know if you mentioned her, I can't remember, but she is amazing every time. Brigitte Lin is just awesome. And by the way, I do recommend Wolf Devil Woman, which is different, but it is a bonkers film, and the dub is really like
Hmm.
the dub. It's one of those like, oh, okay, I guess you made these choices
I
to
see here
dub
in my
this way.
sources that Wolf Devil Woman, which came out in 1982, also has the title, I love this, Wolfen Ninja. So
Yeah. Actually,
honestly,
for a while,
absolutely.
I have to check Amazon, which is where I saw Wolf Devil Woman first, or maybe it was Netflix. But there was some crossover for a while, and Amazon had a lot of martial arts films. I think they still do. Some of them got culled in the kind of great culling of like, whoa, I don't think you own this film. We're gonna cut you off, because there
Sure.
was a lot of people putting up kind of indie distribution, let's say, that weren't really supposed to.
Hmm.
Some of it was legit though, which sucked for a lot of people who were legitimately indie,
Yeah.
releasing partners. I had to check again to see if either of those were. For a while, both were up, and they were similar versions. But I do recommend, if you want to watch a bonkers movie, and I actually need to get a copy on DVD or Blu-ray of Wolf Devil Woman,
That's a
because
great idea.
it's it's pretty great.
Awesome. Okay. We will get farther into it. Julia, so I know that you were watching this and you thought, oh, this is really beautiful.
Yeah,
What
the
were your thoughts
whole
here?
thing, I mean, not first of all, there is watercolor painting in it, but the whole thing feels like a watercolor painting. Like everything, because all the
Hmm.
pastel colors and any given scene will be mostly, pastel blue or mostly green or mostly pink or whatever, and or white. And it's just, it was just visually so striking to me. And the beautiful, uh, bride with white hair character, the I guess is she a witch? Is that what they call
Well,
her?
she
Or
becomes she is the witch, and
yeah, the
she's
witch.
the main witch of this cult. But then she becomes a sort of white haired version of herself after
Right,
she
right.
goes
But
through.
I mean, just throughout the
Yeah.
film, Lian or Brigitte Lin, I guess is the actress's name, is just so beautiful, and all the crazy, just the crazy effects of the conjoined twins, and just all of it. I mean, it's just so interesting to look at. Really interesting story. I really enjoyed it a lot, and yeah, we did watch it with the subtitles since Tony. I think that's probably the first version we found anyway, but was glad for the recommendation not to watch the dub. So because it was really neat.
Drew, what about you?
I'd seen this one other time, probably in the late '90s, thereabouts. This is only the second time I watched it. I, like probably most of our listeners, I am largely more familiar with Ronny Yu's American horror films. It's a beautiful, like Julia says, it's a beautiful movie, and it's not a horror film per se, but it's definitely got elements of that. Particularly, there's some fairly over the top gore. There is like a lot of atmospherics, and the conjoined twins that are the leader of this cult feel very much like something out of a horror film. So it's not surprising that his career took like a side, like a side quest into that. And actually, what I did after watching this is I went back and I rewatched Bride of Chucky and Freddy versus Jason, because I wanted this. Well, I wanted to see what stylistic stuff bled over, no pun intended, and surprisingly, actually a lot. Like the use of like fog and the use of like color in certain scenes in both of those American movies have a lot of the same stylistic touches. Like you can tell that they were directed by the same person, which is interesting since those were kind of hired hand gigs, but he
Hmm.
still managed to inject a lot of his personality into it.
Well, now that
But
you say that, there's this moment in Freddy versus Jason when Jason is like standing in the cornfield, and like in my mind, he's like spinning his machete back and forth as he moves back, like in different directions, and it's almost like something out of one of these movies. Like
I
yeah,
love all
blood
the spinning stuff in this
blood
movie.
sprays, in these sort of athletic
Arterial
geysers, and
arterial spray. Yeah.
just, and uh, that I hadn't actually thought about that. I remember we were stunned by that scene in Freddy versus Jason, but yeah, now it makes more sense.
It's cool to see, as somebody that comes at this more from, an American horror fan, to see like the DNA,
Yeah.
shared DNA between the two. And I'm sure that's probably where a lot of our listeners will come at it as well. I really enjoyed kind of playing, cinematic archivist with that, and like, looking at the movies like that. But just as a stand, on its own, I feel like I'm devoting a lot of time talking to these other movies, but just on its own, this is a beautiful movie that is certainly worth checking out if you've never seen it before. It's got a lot of memorable imagery in it. I think Julie's saying it looks like a watercolor is a really good description of how this movie looks. It's just stunning.
Beautiful.
By the way, I have a lot of Brigitte Lin recommendations for the end of the
Oh,
podcast.
great. That's great.
Also, I for some reason when I was watching it this time too, I thought I have a lot of recommendations, like Chinese Ghost Story. I think would go well as a double feature. Which I don't know if we did that or not.
We've never discussed Chinese Ghost Story.
Probably
not.
Joey,
I don't
you
think.
probably
I'll
did
check
Chinese
on that.
Ghost Story. But yeah, if you liked all the spinning and all the romance and everything, like I think you would dig Chinese Ghost Story as well. But I would also show this. I think if you want to pair it with an American movie, I would do a double feature of this and Legend, Ridley Scott's Legend, because it just has there's parts of the feel of it. I think it's hard to describe. I don't know if people would get it. To me, it has a similar flavor profile, for lack of a better term. And I think if you watch this and watched those two together, you would see where I'm coming from. But I am just, yeah. By the way, Julia, if you ever want to go down that path and watch more stuff like this, I can definitely tell you all the cool romance / wuxia films that are out there, because that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Well, within a week, we're going to do the second one of these. I just want to correct the record really quick. I apologize. We have discussed Chinese Ghost Story. We did it on March 2nd, 2015.
Well,
oh wow!
How could you not remember something that we did 7.5 years ago?
Yeah, I thought so, and then I should have looked it up, but in passing, I was like, wait, it seems like we did. But
yeah.
I would do part 2 of that sometime too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Anyway,
gosh. So the first thing I wanted to mention, and then I think we should get into the story more. But first of all, I think it's really interesting that in the past like 7 or so years, or maybe 10 years, American cinema has been taken over by these stories of superheroes, right? And everybody sort of takes it for granted that you can go to a movie that's 90 minutes long and has people, or 2 hours, and has people who just naturally fly around and have superheroes, and there's lip service given to why that's the case. But those Tony Stark and everybody live in a world that is different from our own, where those things exist. These, in a sense, are like that. These are very much like superhero movies. These guys, as far as I can work out, if you are like Brigitte Lin's character, Lian Nichang, or if you are like Leslie Chung's character, Cho Yi-hang, if you're either of them, you have so much inner coolness, so much chi, that it becomes a superpower. You can float, you can leap, you can you could throw a post-it note and cut open a watermelon. I mean, you can do pretty much anything because you have superpowers. And I think it's neat that there's not a damn moment ever when they explain any of that. It's just taken for granted that the audience understands all.
Oh yeah, well, there's a long history in both novels, really your novels dating back quite some time, and comics. For a while there was a company that was putting out comics from China, and unfortunately, I think it was First Comic. The thing about it kind of looks, Chinese comics kind of look a little bit like, if you're familiar with manga, they have kind of a similar style.
Huh.
But Chinese comics look a little. I mean, it's just they tend to be. Well, what's interesting though is Julia pointed out it kind of looks watercolor. A lot of the comics from China that came over here were colored, like but they have all these really nice looking wash, like watercolor look, and it's just there's just so much beautiful stuff. But you get things like Comics One was the name of the company, by the way, that was putting out, and they put out Storm Riders, which Storm Riders is a superhero. Like that's the thing, is all these swords, like all the swords people, all the heroic action stars are in these novels and comics and films. They may be period pieces, but they're all superheroes.
Right.
Like in this,
I just think that's fascinating.
that's just and it's awesome. I love the older movie Storm Riders. I think there was I think they did a series after that, but that and Heroic Trio,
yes,
is also like a more contemporary one, which the Flying Guillotine ends up showing up in Heroic Trio.
Well, Dragon Butterfly Sword.
Heroic Trio 1 especially is amazing.
Oh, I forgot about Heroic Trio being taking place in the 90s, right? Or the 80s, whatever it is.
Yeah. Or like sort of, and there's like a near future.
That's Michelle Yeoh, right? In there.
Yeah.
But it's
awesome that there's like it's all these like superhero stories where it's just like if you're an awesome enough martial artist, you are a superhero.
Yes.
Or villain.
And in the world of this movie, we find that Cho Yee-hung has grown up from early we see him training with this kung fu master. Forgive me, I'm going to use the word kung fu because that's just what I've always known it as. But he trains with his kung fu master from a very early age, and he becomes sort of the Lone Ranger. Like he's part of this sect. He's understood to be the greatest protector, and he's apparently like punishing wrongdoers in the neighboring villages and anywhere in the kingdom, and it's sort of played out hilariously that he's a part of the group, but everybody's
part of his
go ahead.
Part of his problem is he was so good at such an early age that he becomes almost ungovernable and just over it. Right. I'm so awesome. But that's also part of his flaws, right? Like you see this kind of trope come through where like nobody's good enough to be so nonchalant, or by not taking your stance. He hasn't learned the great power comes great responsibility, right? He's still like, I'm just good. I do what I want. And people are trying to rein him in, including his master. He's saying, hey, you really should take this seriously and live within the confines of what we're supposed to do in the martial arts world.
Yeah. And so in the background of this, where we have these various kung fu clans that frankly I find a little bit confusing, but there's all of these clans who are learning to be warriors, essentially to protect the kingdom. The master believes that Cho Yee-hung should become the leader because there are great wars coming up very soon. And Cho Yee-hung's like, I actually would rather not. That doesn't sound fun. I would rather be the Lone Ranger. However, this girl that I've been training with since I was a little kid, I think she would make a swell leader. And I, first of all, I just thought that was fascinating that that's they're all shocked at the notion of making a woman the leader of the clan, but he's all for it, frankly, because number one, you get the impression it's two reasons. Number one, he thinks she could probably actually do the job, and number two, he has no desire.
Well, isn't she also the daughter of the master or the
she's the daughter of like one of the masters, the second one. Which is
who has it out for him.
Right. She loves him. She has loved him from an early age. Loves him so much that
she gives her father's jade to him, and he promptly gives it away to a guy whose wife died in childbirth, sadly.
Right. He takes pity on the guy because he doesn't.
Yeah.
He is careless. He is magnanimous, but he's not looking out for this girl's the fact that this girl is in love with him. He is careless with her heart, and all of this is setting up a fantastic soap opera. But before we get into the existence of Lian Nichang, I just want to mention that those openings and the training. Go ahead, Drew. Yeah, what were you going to say? Yeah.
Well, you're talking all this stuff, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying you're wrong about like the superhero comic book sort of comparisons. That's fine, but it's the thing I keep thinking about. The thing that this made me think about a lot is like this big epic fantasy movies
Yeah.
like the Lord of the Rings movies, or like the cultists and all this stuff. Like they might as well have just been orcs, like
Yes.
it's um
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying you're wrong with the superhero comparison. I think that that's fine. It's just
No,
I didn't dawn on me until just now. Like the whole time I was thinking is like, well, this is an epic fantasy is what this is.
Yes.
well, Chinese comics and novels, starting with novels, right? But into comics, like, I mean, you can go back as far as like reading the Water Margin, and I mean, this is just they tend, a lot of literature is just packed with tons of characters. And one thing I can say about the comics from China that I was collecting at the time, where you can't read it, it's so much more dense than if you read manga. Just the storytelling and the amount of characters and everything that's going on, I found it was really cool to go back and forth, but you really have to pay attention. And the same with literature from China, as I've seen. I mean, there somebody might be more familiar and go, I don't know, Tony. But what I've read, what I've seen, is this, and because of how dense everything is and the number of characters, a lot of the movies have to kind of pick and choose. Like you may have a movie that's like, yeah, this takes place in chapter 47 of, I'm just throwing out numbers, but this takes place during this time period in this series of novels, because it's so epic that you have to do. That's why some of the TV series are long and
Yes.
storied, is because and it's exactly what you're talking about, Drew. Like if you go to the source material, it's often just it's epic, just full of tons of characters, tons of intrigue, political intrigue, and it might even be multi-generational depending on which ones, what novel or comic that you're reading.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think you picked up on exactly what it is, and what makes, like, the part of the DNA is that epic fantasy. I think somebody else coined the term, but in my head, I don't know who to attribute it to. But I always think of it. There's a concept of heroic bloodshed, and there's just gonna be X amount of tragic bloodshed in the interest of doing the right thing, or possibly the right thing, or what you think of as the right thing in
Well,
these.
sure.
But the heroic bloodshed part of all of this fantasy stuff is just in the DNA of it all.
Well, that's Camelot too. You picture the
Sure.
smoky hill and the fires below, and Arthur looking down and going, I have no choice but to go to war with Mordred, and but I wish I didn't have to. And somehow in this, my wife and her lover, who I'm also
Yeah,
best friends with, is wrapped up in the whole thing. And that
exactly.
sort of like high, very, very high feeling, right? Where, and very melodramatically stated, and there's always fire and blood and horses. Um, Mike, in fact, I think it's kind of interesting that, like I say, the thing that we spend all our time with now, which is the superhero universe, is so similar, except the weird detail that in our culture we put costumes on all those people. That's the only thing that is really different. Because the rest of
Well,
it is yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of costumes here too.
true.
I mean,
I
there's a
mean,
lot of great, like, especially if you go for, like, when they get translated even more into comics, like the costuming of a lot of wuxia films, and a lot of, like, even like, because they get in the 70s, they get even, I would say, almost even more colorful and bizarre. But and this goes back again, like, if you want a dense fantasy, or it's not as much fantasy, it's more, of a time, but Water Margin is mid 14th century.
mm,
So you want to go read a translation of that. It's a dense, really cool book, and it's been adapted a bunch of times. Not as fantastical But as you get, again, a lot of our comics come from literature or the
Yes.
themes behind them, right? So I think you picked up on it though, Jason, like the idea of, all of, depending on which translation or which retelling of Arthurian
Yeah.
legends, some more realistic, some more fantastic, some aimed at young adults, but the themes of it, the tragedy of perhaps Arthur and Lancelot and all that stuff comes through. Like we can watch and read an infinite number of these kind of tales.
Yes.
And especially because this one has so much more, the romance and the when you watch it all unfold is amazing. The tragedy of the romance here
Yes.
on display is
And
heartbreaking.
for it to be good, it has to have that. You have to have these
Yeah.
heightened tragedies and everything. That's sort of how this kind of thing has to go, and the best superhero stories are the same way. There has to be sacrifice, and Jean Grey has to like flame out in a massive way, Tony Stark has to snap himself into oblivion. Yes,
And when you think about it too, at the beginning, we start with, we can assume that our hero has been sitting in the cold for
yes,
10 years. Because when they
yes.
wake him up, he goes, "Oh, it's been 10 years." Like he's been sitting on the mountaintop waiting for this flower and hoping the love of his life will come to him.
Will come hoping to
And
be healed. That he has healing
exactly.
for her, but we don't yet know why. We just know that it is a magical flower that he's been guarding. And it is a wonderful opening. It reminds you of a play. Because if you can imagine the curtain going up and you find this monk-like person sitting on a mountain guarding a magical flower in hopes that somebody who needs healing will come to him, but not these assholes who come and like ask him.
But they're kind of supposed to be, I mean, they're intent on saving the emperor,
Yes.
but they're not necessarily evil. I
No,
think
no, not at all.
perhaps
No.
I would have to know more. I mean, depending on which emperor you're talking about, maybe
Oh, so
that
funny.
emperor is a despot. I can't remember, I haven't looked up, the time frame this is supposed to be in, but they're trying to steal it. He can't let that happen. And bad things happen for them because he's the best swordsman in the land. But
Yeah, I,
man,
I wanted to
just
mention
what
that.
a great opening, right?
No, it's fat. Like I say, it really has the flavor of curtains going up on a stage, and
Yeah.
beautiful. So then we flash back to his training as a young boy, and here the funny thing is, I was thinking about in Kill Bill, there's a moment when Beatrice is training against a big red backdrop and leaping and all of this stuff, and she's kind of half in silhouette, and I'm sure that this is a visual that is in a million movies, but it's here as well as this kid is
Yeah,
training.
I mean, it's I like Tarantino movies, but there's no doubt where
Oh, for sure.
he's not shy about where his come from, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's part of that's part of what he does. But
yeah.
yeah, it happens in several movies. But if he said, "Oh yeah, I was totally like this is private right here," you'd be like,
I
"Yeah,
wouldn't be
that's true."
surprised in the slightest.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
right.
so what we learn about Cho Yi-hung and what a badass he is. There's a point where Cho Yi-hung has to go and he winds up helping this woman who's a very, very pregnant woman fleeing some bandits with her husband, and he ends up getting help from this magical witch that he once saw as a child, and she just flies in and does a little bit of help, and that's the first time he sees her as an adult, and that sort of lets us into her story, where she is essentially the perfect opposite number of Cho Yi-hung. Lian Nichang, the wolf girl, she also is part of the cult, but not really that into it. She lays around eating grapes or whatever. She's just laying around being magical and being more powerful than everybody else, while the rest of the cult is doing their cult dances and stuff. And we also learn that the cult is run by, I don't know how I they're it the cult is run by a conjoined twin pair who are also like super sorcerers, so that they
Yeah.
and they're also mean to one another. And it is such a bonkers idea. I mean, it is like
Yeah, that's
I
one of the weirdest relationships I've ever seen.
it's great. I mean, it's weird and sexual and strange and funny, and it's really a cool idea. I mean, I'm
There's
here
a
for it.
there's a history of for some of this too, where there's a little bit because we don't know they're conjoined for a while, right? And so there we see
I guess that's true, but I knew
the
because
brother and
I
then the
knew, yeah.
sister, and they come in and out when we first introduced to them. It's almost like, whoa, are these similar aspects? Because before that, we also have a dancer who's male,
Right. Who changes
and
gender.
then turns. So there's a lot of fluidity,
Gender
there's a lot
fluidity.
of history in the kind of sorcery
Mm.
elements, because you'll often have a sort of male aspect sorcerer who will be voiced by a woman or vice versa. And
Yes.
there's a lot of history throughout wuxia films or martial arts films that involve kind of the supernatural or sorcery or cults, where there's a kind of common theme of a fluid sorcerer.
I'm
And
thinking of the gender fluid Bergkatze in Gatchaman, which is a Japanese, not Chinese piece, but it's very, very
Right.
similar, right?
But you'll see, and even when they talk in this, they kind of add some vocal effects.
Yeah.
Like there's a vocoder kind of thing
Yeah.
applied, and that you'll see that in other movies. And it's just part of the kind of strange sorcerer mystique that you'll see in different tales, which is fascinating as well. But I love the cut because they basically kind of spin around, but you don't notice them exactly spinning. So they'll come into frame and it'll be the brother.
Yes.
And then from the other side will come into the frame the sister and taunt,
You're right. You're so right.
Girl.
At first, I thought I had forgot. I mean, I knew that they were conjoined twins, but I forgot for a moment when that was happening. I was like, "Does the priest go off screen and then like warp and come back?"
Well, see,
like
that's
the
thing,
dancer, because the dancer spins
yeah.
around and turns into different genders. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in other movies, they're kind of a similar aspect, but in this one they've decided like, oh, it's going to be more kind of bonkers or interesting in that they're brother and sister.
So yeah,
and amazing costumes as well, by the way.
Oh,
Totally.
they're amazing, and these performers are fantastic. I mean,
yeah,
it's
really interesting.
Francis Cheung and Elaine Lee, and they are giving their all to these characters, and they're sniping and mean and they have telekinetic powers, and just it's
also because there's a little bit of jealousy from the sister.
Yes.
Because he's obsessed with our wolf girl witch, and has been in a really creepy way, because he's basically waiting until she's old enough. So he's also kind of like,
he does. He has a line.
Hey,
like
once she gets old enough, this will be great. And like but I mean that's part of the whole, like, I mean, he's a villain sorcerer, right? Like,
sure,
what do you do? And so she's a lot of times there is a little bit of it's a weird relationship, because they're brother and sister, but they're also conjoined, and yeah, but also there's a creepy aspect to her being jealous as well. But everybody is okay with all of this because they have this perfect weapon that can help them win against anybody that they send out. You send out your perfect weapon, she will destroy everything that you ask her to destroy.
I mean, didn't this just inspired me? I just wanted to go write something where you had a character who was just kind of part of this cult, but not really into it anymore, and has like superpowers. And I mean, I love this, and you're like, oh, what's going to happen to the witch? What's going to happen? Because she's not really into it. What happens next? Well, what happens is she falls in love with the hero of the good cult. Fantastic. That's perfect. It's exactly what you want. The funny thing is, this movie's 90 minutes long. It just rockets along, and so no sooner do they set those guys up than these people very soon begin a really sweet love affair. And if you just saw Shang-Chi, that borrowed a great deal from this, where the hero in that case, the underworld hero, falls in love with in that case, a sorceress who's part of a hidden sect, and they have lots of wire work in the water and stuff.
If you were a fan of that movie, like the garden / pool scene between the two lovers is again, I'm not saying it's ripping off or anything, but there's no doubt that, and this is I've seen a similar motif in different movies, so it's not like
Sure.
it's just this one. But if you watch that movie and you see this, you'll be like, oh,
I would never say ripped
okay.
off. To me, it's more like a quotation,
No, it's
like
a quotation. It's an homage, but
yeah,
it's cool if you dug that
yeah,
and want to see like, basically a different aspect of it.
yeah.
And then especially because their first meeting, right? It has a very similar through line because their first meeting, she's like, I got to go back. Like, he's like, who was that? Oh, I'm so in love. It's the definitely the
Yeah.
star-crossed. I have to find this woman thing. Great.
Yes. It's so great, and also again, it has a sort of operatic style to it because when they finally do sort of run off together for a while, he swears to the heavens that he will never let her down.
Oh, and that's where
Well,
you're
she
like,
lets her
oh, this
down.
can't go
Yeah.
well.
Well, we already know because of the beginning of the film
We
that she
right.
ends up first. So we're like, well, obviously that didn't work out.
By
Because,
virtue of being in an extended flashback, we know.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. So now what I'm trying to remember is how in hell things go so poorly. Yeah,
Well,
because it gets very
I mean,
confusing with all the different clans. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
right. Well, what happens? I mean, his downfall is everybody's against. Like, there's you have opposition again. Star-crossed lovers. You have to have
Right.
opposition on both sides. So you have a jealous, his friend who's jealous, who loves him, who was willing to put her life on the line.
Yeah.
At one point too, because he's like, hey, I gotta go take a break when he's supposed to be doing penance, and
Right.
she's like, yeah, I'll wait for you, which is like very altruistic of her.
There's a great
So
moment
this is
like
the
that,
person
Tony,
who's
where he's being punished. This is like just one. It's heartwarming. He's supposed to go do his
he's
penance.
supposed to sit in front of the Buddha
And
without
all of
water
his
for like
buddies
3
come
days.
and hang out with him. It is so
Yeah,
fun. It's great. I mean, you watch it and you're like, "Oh, I want to be a part of these guys. I am getting to know them, and she loves him, and it's great." All of this is. I was just sort of grinning ear to ear when I was watching this because I
of
was like,
course.
this is perfect
And
storytelling."
even though he's been harsh to some of them, because
Yeah.
they were doing like, oh yeah, I should have paid at the brothel, and and they also defend him, and it kind of like he's called to the court because the dad is like, oh, this guy, he doesn't respect anybody, and then like, hey, didn't he beat you up? And his master's kind of like, you kind of got to accept the good and the bad, right?
He's
But
well, the
everybody who comes up is going, "Oh no, I tripped, and I
right.
was exerting myself too much, and oh yeah, this happened." And he tells the one guy, "Hey, you got to pay." Like, and all of them have done something, minor to major infractions, but
And
all of
he,
them
as
know
just
that
a
he was
local
doing the right
hero,
thing.
he just
Right,
enforces all of it. He's Batman, basically.
right,
But
yeah.
he's enforcing it against just people he knows, his friends, and they're like, yeah, well, he's Batman, and we admit that. Yeah, it's lovely.
But
It's really lovely.
But to answer your question, what really the thrust of what sends us into the end of this and into Bride with White, the full on Bride with White Hair in part 2, which goes further, is that she goes back and says, "Hey, I'm in love." In fact, she's actually
Oh
supposed to be
right.
bride,
Oh right.
and
Yes.
gets creeped on heavily by the brother until he realizes that, oh, you know what, she's just gonna lay there, she's not gonna be my bride, and she has to take punishment from that.
That's right.
Everybody lines
That
up and
whole
just
sequence.
she has to
Yeah.
get beat out. She has to get beat out of the cult,
And he says you're not
right?
allowed to use your superpowers
That was
to
horrible.
Right.
yeah. And
And
so she's expelled in a like a Klingon. They beat her.
Yeah, that
right,
was
Forgive me,
awful.
or
but
gang, you know.
yeah, the like
But while
it
that's
was nuts.
happening,
Yeah.
they've sent people to kill everybody in the Wu-Tang or Wu-Dang
Hmm.
side of things. So when he comes back, he thinks, "Oh, it's got to be her,"
Yeah.
which it isn't. Through various, they left clues that basically point. So when she finally makes it, and she's made this, horrible sacrifice, stripped of her powers, stripped of her status, all for love. And he goes, "Oh, well, that must have been you." I mean, guilt, but because when he comes back, his master's beheaded. They're having to search for like, where's the body?
Good
It's so
grief.
things are so
Yeah.
chaotic and horrific that they can't even find the body. They have to search.
Yeah.
And of course, his friend is convinced, well, you should have never loved her. Look what she does.
Right.
Yeah.
We, the audience, know that it wasn't her. We know it wasn't her because, first of all,
Right.
she's been busy getting the shit kicked out of her so that she can leave her cult to be with Cho Yi-hang. But, everybody else believes that it was her. So she shows up to basically talk to him about all this and to say, I've been kicked, I've left the cult so that I can be with you. And everybody turns on her. And so for the second time that day, she gets viciously attacked, and
And he
Really
believes that it
heartbreaking.
can't.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, it's again that tragedy element that.
yes,
And she gets stabbed partially because of him, and she's like, "Why won't you believe me?" That's the only thing, because that's the only thing, and that was the big thing. Is she said, "I cannot stand when people don't believe me, when I'm betrayed," and that's the final straw. Was he can't believe? I mean, he's so distraught about everybody getting killed and his master's beheaded and everything that he can't see that it was kind of a frame up.
yeah. I have a question. It's because now she goes through a transformation, a physical transformation. Let me ask an ignorant question. Is this merely she is taken over by a vengeful aspect to become the bride with white hair, or does she die and come back as the bride with white hair?
No, I think it's basically all of that. You didn't believe me. It's all of the powers inside her that have twisted. Basically, like her core is now changed.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
she had,
because she's kind of impossible to kill.
Her aspects
so,
of her are dead, I guess. Probably like she decides like, I am no longer the wolf girl that you knew.
Yeah, and she becomes, in the same way that Gandalf, goes away and reemerges as Gandalf the White. She becomes a transformed version of herself, with amazing white hair that she can, but which has superhuman powers. By the way, I use this word powers. I know it's not the right, but it's what we would use in English. And she, her hair, she can use it as a weapon. It can extend. She can throw people
That
around.
was so weird.
She can. It's awesome. I love it. And so yes, she has full-on Medusa powers now, and Medusa, the Marvel Comics version, not the Medusa Greek version. And yes, and I think that's about the end, because because she leaves, and Leon and Cho Yi-hang at that point heads for the mountains, hoping that he can basically. It seems to be that he's hoping that she will come back to him someday, and and the flower is representative of healing. That they will just find a way to.
Yeah, I'm
heal.
looking
Well, he's
forward
hoping that
to
restore.
watching the second part.
Yeah.
It is interesting that she doesn't really become the title character until the movie's basically over. So
right.
that does make me want to watch part 2.
Yeah.
More more so. I don't think I've ever seen Bride with White Hair 2. Maybe I have, and I just
I remember very little about it, other than I remember the line, "Men, I see one, I kill one." That's the way I remember her slogan being in the second film, because she has a whole army of man killing ladies.
Yeah, women who have been wronged.
Yes,
which when you look at enough society, you're
going to find ample volunteers, I think, and
truth in cinema.
There's a lot to be said about the cinematography, and there's so many interesting in different directors who are like this. There's a look to these kind of 90s films that is similar, but they're done by different people, but there's kind of this flavor that happens around you. This time period, a lot of a lot of Dutch angles, and a lot of Julia pointed out like this kind of watercolor look to a lot of things.
Yeah,
and I could watch an infinite amount of these of this look and feel.
I love how he moves his camera, Ronny Yu. I mean, he does a lot of this thing where for dramatic effect, a lot of zooms and a lot of where the camera sort of swoops towards the actor from below, so that they sort of loom up over the camera and dramatically, and which sounds very silly, but actually plays very dramatically. You never really feel like you're looking at an awkward use of just a zoom in or anything. It's
So,
yeah.
so Drew, you said you went back and watched his, American horror films. Was it kind of cool to just did you notice these aspects where you're like, oh, I didn't realize like this DNA was part of this.
It was more striking, to be sure, because the when I had encountered Bride of Chucky the first time, it was a couple of years removed from seeing Bride with White Hair,
Mm.
and there is definitely a lot of visual just sort of connective tissue with his American horror film. Jason already talked about the cornfield rampage in Freddy versus Jason, but like there's the way there's a scene, and this is going to sound pervy and I apologize in advance, but there's a scene where Jennifer Tilly's character takes a bubble bath in Bride of Chucky, and the way he uses like the bubbles in that scene is very much the way he uses fog and mist in this movie. Like he's very much like a visual storyteller, and I think that's one of the reasons probably why he connected well enough with these American monster movies. They're not scripted by him, like, so the scripts have a much more tongue-in-cheek sort of American feel to them, but the visuals of them, like go like if you haven't watched those two movies in a while, like I would recommend like watching this movie and then going back and rewatching Bride of Chucky and Freddy versus Jason, because it makes for an interesting triple feature.
No, that sounds fantastic. Yeah. I'm looking at other stuff. He made Fearless. He directed Fearless with Jet Li, which I can't remember if I've seen that one. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we should get our final thoughts, and then we'll pick all of this up next week with Bride with White Hair 2. I'm so excited about this. This is going to be a blast. So Tony, have we given a sufficient opening so that somebody understands sort of where we're going with this?
I think so. I mean, I just love the fantasy aspect. There's so many other movies you could also kind of catch up to. Like I said, I mentioned Storm Riders, Hero, Zoo Warriors, ZU. It's spelled Zoo Warriors of the Magic Mountain. And some of these are some of these are Brigitte Lin. Like she plays the Ice Queen in Zoo Warriors. So there's like a connective tissue there. She's just awesome. She's in so many good movies. Like Chunking Express, also she's great in. Semi Gods and Semi Devils. Because she's in Deadful Melody. Like that makes sense. Deadful Melody is also great because you have a stringed instrument, the traditional stringed instrument that can shoot, like I said, like martial arts lasers and blow up people. It's just I just love all of that. You have somebody who turns against humanity because she's been wronged, and all of a sudden her hair becomes a weapon. In addition to her just being an awesome at swordplay, now she's triple threat, right? And the makeup, all the makeup work and costuming, just beautiful. So I'm really happy we did this. There are a lot of great wuxia films that we could do, and some of them are steeped in horror. We should probably do that at some point in time.
For sure.
But yeah, if anybody wanted to recommend, like I said, if anybody wanted to head down, like, hey, what are some highlights that I should watch? Definitely would want people to hit us up on on Facebook or wherever and go, what else? This was cool. What else? I can lead you down that path. But yeah, it's a beautiful movie, and any excuse to see it. I noticed there was a kind of a little bit expensive but really cool box set that I may be quote unquote forced to get, because I realized I thought I had this on DVD, and I don't know why I don't, or maybe I have it on DVD and I don't have it on Blu-ray. But there's a newer Blu-ray set that I have a mighty need for this Blu-ray set now. I would love a UHD of both. Like if I could get 4K versions of the top wuxia films, I would be so happy. There needs to be more 4K restorations of really cool stuff like this.
Awesome. Julia, what are your thoughts?
So you mentioned the thing about the clans being confusing, and that is true. That part was kind of the least. Yeah, I mean, they had to fill out the movie obviously because it's pretty short already. So they needed to have an excuse for the fighting to happen and all that kind of stuff. But that part was probably my least favorite as far as like I'm just like wait, what's the deal with all the but anyway, but the fighting itself is really interesting. I've always enjoyed the flying. What do they call? What are they called? The flying
Well, the
is there
wire
like a
work, I
term?
suppose.
Well, I thought there was like a term for whatever. But anyway, the fact that they can fly when they fight and everything, I always thought that was
Yeah,
super cool.
I don't know any word other than, well, I just call them superpowers, but
Yeah.
it's wire work, and they, it's just
Well, it's just so
wuxia come
effective
through.
because it really does look magical. It looks like they're just lighter than air and they can just fly. It's not like, because if talking about comparing it to American superhero movies, in American superhero movies, the people either look like they're flying straight up and down, like they're just standing, like Doctor Strange, and just can move up, or they're
Mhm.
like kind of horizontal like Superman. But this whole thing of like spinning up or just kind of swooping across, it's really cool. It's a very interesting way of moving that we don't
Yeah.
really see in American films at all. I thought that was really cool. And then like I said, just the fact that the backdrops are just these gorgeous, pastel colors, and then the clothing and the all complements it. So just aesthetically beautiful, and the strange characters that are in the cult, the cult leaders and all of the characters in the cult really. All of that was just very interesting. This is definitely a film that's going to stay with me for a while.
That's wonderful.
And so leading up to this is kind of an era where you see more and more wire work, like because a lot of Shaw Brothers stuff, there was some of it, but they tend to use cuts and like people flying across the screen. But as you get to a lot of wuxia films, you start to see more and more of that to give it that unearthly feel. And then U.S. audiences kind of really picked up on it because of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which
I love
had a
that movie.
pedigree. That was
That is a
2000,
gorgeous movie.
and that was one of the first kind of breakout international. Like people, I was watching this stuff regardless, but that was, I think, one of the first kind of breakout movies.
Absolutely.
Just because of its distribution, it got a lot of theaters over here. But the wire work that they did in that had, as we can see, going back to 80s into 90s, we've been doing this a long time, but that kind of first introduced a lot of people to like, whoa, look, these people float and they stand on trees and tiptoe across water, all of that.
Exactly.
And that's all amazing. And a lot of that, you can see it in a lot of comics as well, that kind of stuff. And there's really great, I wish that some of these comics, because they go on for years, I wish more of the comics had finished their run when Comics One was doing it, but sadly there just wasn't as much of a market. The idea was, because they did the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon comic as well, like they brought it over here because the movie takes place kind of in the middle of the story, or I can't remember exactly where. I want to say it's more in the middle, but it could be in the first like quarter. I have to look it up again.
Yeah, I need to see that film again.
But because of that, like sadly, the movies just didn't do well. Like didn't bring it into the consciousness enough for everybody to pick up the comics. And also, they're really, like I said, they're really dense stories, which is kind of the confusion you're talking about, because there tend to be a lot of characters and a lot of different factions as well. But yeah, I wish that more of those had finished their run, because there's some really beautiful work that just never got finished translating. Sorry, sadly enough.
Wonderful. Drew, what about you?
I think that this is a fascinating movie It's very, very beautiful. It's also, for the horror fans, it has, bizarre characters and gore. Pretty good gore if that's what you're into. And I had a good time watching it. I'm glad that I spent some time with it. I'm looking forward to revisiting the universe for part 2.
Yeah. Same here. And this is speaking of horror, I mean, conjoined twins are not monsters, but these characters are a monster. There is it is an amazing performance by the actors portraying the leaders, the odd dual brother sister priest demon characters that are it is really wonderful and strange, and I'm really glad it's here. So yeah, let us get endorsements for the week. I'm dying to know because it feels like it's been the longest week of the year. I'd love to know what you guys have been reading or want us to pay attention to. Drew, I'm going to ask you about Murder She Wrote. Tony,
Okay.
Tony, yeah. So that doesn't have to be endorsement, but when we get to it, I'm going to ask you.
Oh no, it totally was going to be an endorsement anyway. But
there we go. Okay.
I'm happy to talk about Murder She Wrote.
That's a preview of that. But Tony, yeah, what do you have for us?
Well, I really enjoyed the Weird Al Yankovic movie, which is on the Roku channel.
Yeah, we all have.
With that, it's so good. It's so funny. Not a traditional biopic. It kind of is closer to like Walk Hard, but
yes,
it's so good. I mean, I laughed so much. It's great. I've been trying to prepare to go in the studio for Deserts of Mars, so I've been watching a lot of Santo movies, and I realized like I love Santo movies, but there are a couple that perhaps aren't as good.
Sure.
I skipped a couple because there's a couple that were just like, oh, this one's not as entertaining. But
it's 100 floors of frights that can all be winners. All right, there's a lot of Santo movies.
I've been watching, but the ones that are good are just really like thanks to Tubi for bringing this back into my life, which I could again. Even the ones that aren't great, you can skip and immediately find something that's awesome. I've also on High Dive, the anime channel. I've been watching a really cool. They took it off and brought it back, and I was so happy because I hadn't finished it. I started rewatching Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which when I first moved to Austin, they would show. I think one of the movies came from a novel series, got adapted as an OVA, original video animation, but there's like 110 episodes, if I'm not mistaken. But it's basically this war between a group that's been at war, interstellar war for 150 years. And it tells the tale of two big heroes on either side, and there's political intrigue, and there's a whole like one side is kind of more contemporary, and the other side is like almost medieval Germany in some ways as far as how people dress and everything. And it tells the tale of these two really young tacticians fighting these wars and the political intrigue and everything. But I remember it because it was the first time I saw it, which I think it was on the movies. So they have these epic space battles, and it's to Bolero, and that really stood out. So they interweave a lot of classical music, but I have been really enjoying that. And it's kind of a cult classic. Like I don't think it's for everybody because it's a lot of like political drama in amongst all the space battles and stuff. You kind of wish somebody. I've been enjoying Andor, but I would love to see somebody take a Star Wars approach, like tell some of these Legend of Galactic Heroes stuff in the realm of Star Wars, like take that tactical battle / personalities thing, because I think you could do a really good job. But that's the other thing. I didn't mean to get too long-winded but it's a really cool series, and I've been enjoying it. And there's a lot there because they have the first like 110 episodes, and I don't know if they have the movies, but then there's a second Legend of Galactic Heroes Gaiden, which is after that. So if you have High Dive or you want to subscribe just to watch that, it's just right up my alley. I've been watching it late at night.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Julia, what do you have to endorse for us?
Well, I want to echo Tony's endorsement of the the Al Yankovic story, which was written by him and by Weird Al Yankovic, and by the guy who originally had the idea for a Funny or Die sketch.
Mhm.
So I've just really been enjoying like listening to the interviews and stuff about that. But yeah, super funny, super creative. No, it's just a weird movie. And then again, I'm going to reiterate my thing from last week, which is there's only 2 more days, and by the time this airs, one more day really to vote. Tuesday, you have to go vote. So if you haven't already, please do. It's one of the most important elections ever. And so just everybody needs to get out and vote. And everybody needs to get out and watch Wakanda Forever because I can't wait to see it.
Wonderful. Drew, so you had posted on Twitter that you had rediscovered Murder She Wrote, and I was just wondering, now like years after the show's gone off the air, because I do this too. I will, my daughter calls it hyperfixation. I will hyperfixate on something and just dive deep into something and want to really get into it. So, what is the Murder She Wrote cinematic universe like? Like, what have you
Yeah.
learned about this weird world that Jessica Fletcher inhabits?
So it was Halloween night this last week. Well, actually, geez, just Monday, not even
Was
that
it a
long
dark and
ago.
stormy? Dark and stormy
It
night.
was actually dark and stormy in
Mm.
Austin. We had just finished watching The Exorcist, and all my guests for that we had over had gone home, and Jamie had gone to sleep, and I turned on the Peacock app on Roku because I got that to watch Halloween Ends for the
Mhm.
show. And I've talked earlier how I really have enjoyed looking at their Halloween selection, but something else that they had done, which is a really cool thing, is they had every episode, every show that they had on there, they had blocked off all their Halloween episodes, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm probably going to pass out watching something like this. What should I watch? And I noticed Murder She Wrote has an episode about the Headless Horseman, which is something I always have an interest in. So I put that
Mhm.
on, and I really enjoyed the sort of comfortable but formulaic vibe of it.
Mm.
And because like Murder She Wrote I is what they call a cozy mystery, which is usually not particularly violent, usually has an eccentric detective in the center of it, and they follow a certain formula. And I don't know why, but I have like fallen into the habit of watching Murder She Wrote before I go to sleep, and it's like it's better than a glass of chamomile tea. Like, and I'm not
Hmm.
saying that because I think it's boring. I don't. I enjoy watching the character. Like, first of all, the guest stars are great. Like if you're into vintage TV, like I just watched an episode today that had like John Saxon and John Astin in it, like, and Virginia Mayo, like, so like you get a lot of cool guest stars on these things. But there's just something very relaxing about
Mhm.
watching the way that these play out, because like every episode is kind of like a play.
Mhm.
You have the sort of episodes where she's in her hometown, and there's this sort of pseudo main Stephen Kingness that's going on there. But then the episodes I think I like the best are when she's like traveling, like
Mm.
we'll drop her into the middle of like a high society party, or the episode I just watched, like she'll be on a film set, and it's like you're watching just like a murder mystery play for 45 minutes, and you have this detective, which is there's other recurring characters, but she's the only character that's really in every episode. So like I hadn't seen Murder She Wrote probably since I was a kid, because my grandmother used to watch it, unsurprisingly, back in the 80s, and sometimes I would
Mhm.
watch it with her, and never in a million years did I think I would fall into like the habit of watching it as an adult. But like I'm really enjoying my Murder She Wrote rewatch.
That's
Um,
wonderful. I
yeah,
completely approve because again, I have a tendency to pick old shows and just dive deep and watch the whole damn thing.
What? You
And
do?
yes,
yeah.
so I'm
I never
so
What?
could have
You've
figured
never
that,
shared that
Jesse.
with anyone.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't talk about it a lot on this show, but yes, I do. Yes,
But it's literally all you post about on Facebook.
that is correct. Yes.
The you know the other, if I have, I'm trying to think if I had.
Yeah, please.
Yes, I do. Speaking of older media, I also got a lot of enjoyment about revisiting. I've been a bit of a zombie after a really busy October, so I've had a lot of vegging the last couple of days, and I was sitting on a collection of Stanley Jack Kirby Avengers
Oh,
comics
sweet.
from the 60s, and I love those. I hadn't read them probably. I used to own them all, and I sold them when I was down and out years ago. So it was wonderful being able to revisit them, and it's my favorite version of the Hulk, hands down, is the version of the Hulk that's in these early issues of the Avengers, where he's like constantly changing his allegiances. And Jack Kirby Hulk is the best Hulk because he's ugly and has a flat head like Boris Karloff Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Like handsome Hulk is the worst Hulk. No offense to people who like that. I don't like that. So yeah, that's also my endorsement. Is it's collected in these things called Mighty Marvel Masterworks, and they're manga size
No kidding.
collections that only cost about $15, and they're Silver Age comics mostly, and I highly recommend them if you're a Silver Age fan and you're trying to bulk up your Silver Age collection.
That's great. Thank you very much. My endorsement actually is something that you can watch for free on YouTube that also is a vintage piece, which is Once Upon a Midnight Scary. Now I know we are past Halloween, but it doesn't matter because this is not per se a Halloween piece. Once Upon a Midnight Scary was a thing that Vincent Price did for, I think, CBS in the 70s. And he basically, what he does is Vincent Price plays Dracula essentially, but he's just talking about, he's introducing these different segments that are live action adaptations of famous books. And so there's an adaptation of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and The House with the Clock in Its Walls and The Ghost Belonged to Me. Legend of Sleepy Hollow being a classic of literature, the other two being modern classics. And so they are like little condensed adaptations. Renee Auberjonois plays Ichabod Crane. They're wonderful, and they always end with this whole, do you want to know more? You can go read the book for a longer version of this, blah, blah, blah. I remember I saw it when it originally came out, and I was just thunderstruck by it. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow part was just, I couldn't take my eyes away from the Headless Horseman and how awesome that was, and House with the Clock in Its Walls just captured my imagination. So you can find these on YouTube now. Once Upon a Midnight Scary, so darn cool. So that is my recommendation. So yeah, we will be back next week for The Bride with White Hair 2. And as we rocket towards our holiday break, we have like probably another, I don't know, month of shows. So Bride with White Hair 2 next week, and then more fun stuff after that. Everybody be excellent to one another. Thank you so much for being on. And I hope you
Go
got
vote.
talk to. Yeah, go vote. Have a good week. Oh, The Huntresses is coming on my TV screen if you want to see a woman who wields a very magical yo-yo. So have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Night.
Night.
Night.